So today, just a brief overview. We could spend, obviously there are entire courses on big data and that type of thing, so I am by no means an expert. I just want to put that out there. But it is an interest of mine, and it is something I work with on a day-to-day basis. So first off, what is big data? And this refers to ways in which an organization is able to create, manipulate, manage very large data sets and storage facilities such as data warehouses. Some of you may have heard those terms thrown around. An example is NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, gathers weather data daily, so things like temperature, barometric pressure, all of that information that you see on the weather forecast. And they gather it all so that we can do research on climate change, on ecosystems, and having an idea of what's going on. So, one issue, I'm sure everyone's heard of this quote by now, especially if you've taken statistics. The biggest issue is defining the language that you use. So if you've taken statistics, I'm sure you've also heard the talk about the different meanings of average. So average could be the actual mean in which you're summing the total of the scores and then dividing by the number of scores. You could be talking about the median, which would be the score that's represented in halfway between the highest and lowest score, or you could be talking about the mode, which is the score that happens most often. So, pros of big data. It's a lot of information. You have a lot to work with. You can be more efficient, you become more accountable, and you're also allowed a lot more movement as far as building a strategic approach towards your goals and policies. Some of the cons, again, it's a lot of information. So it really matters how you're going to mine that information, and you really need to know what you're looking for. You need to be conscious of the sources of your data. It's a big issue as far as being able to validate the data that you're using. Obviously, if you start off with garbage, you're going to end up with garbage. And also, you need some comparative understanding of the data. Just because you have a bunch of numbers doesn't mean that they actually mean anything. If I say it's 10 degrees outside, am I talking about Fahrenheit, Celsius, Kelvin? Hopefully not Kelvin. So you just need to have that idea and framework of understanding. So let's look at the pros. The larger the sample size, the more accurate representation you're going to have of the population. Again, this is sort of basic statistics. You're going to become more efficient and accountable. You can find out where the waste is. You can eliminate those processes or any duplicative attributes that you're working with. And finally, all of this information allows for a lot more focus and a strategic approach towards all of your policies. I have a quick map up here talking about the freshwater as of 2000, and just as a representation, knowing how you're going to spend money, how nonprofits, especially in Africa, it's very noticeable, obviously, just bringing fresh water to people. So you're not going to be putting effort into South America. They have enough. So the cons. It is a lot of information. And for those of you who are old Trekkies, you have the Tribble episode. So, you know, the cute furry, love them, and then all of a sudden things get out of control. It can be overwhelming, and you need to, again, be aware of the data sources. Where is this information coming from? Again, garbage in, garbage out. You really can't do anything if you're working with nonsensical numbers or just trash. And it's important that you recognize that you narrow down what exactly the question is that you're looking for. So what information are you looking for? You could spend days working with all of the information that could be gathered, but unless you have that focus of a question, you really aren't going to be getting anywhere. And again, you need that comparative understanding. The numbers need to be useful and have some sort of meaning. So a quick rundown of tools of the trade. The web-based program R is becoming by and far the most used product. Again, it's open source, so that really helps with the management of the system. SPSS, I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with. Also SAS, those are sort of the top three. And as you can see, there's a multitude of statistical programs out there. So what are the four types of big data? You have the simple summation and statistics. You have a predictive big data, which allows you to do some forecasting. You have descriptive, which is the data mining where you're really looking for a specific question. And the prescriptive, or the optimization, where you're actually able to use that information. So as you can see by the simple diagram there, and this is a business analyst rather than looking for a specific nonprofit setting, but it works the same. You'll see at the blue spheres is really what we're talking about: the statistical analysis, the forecasting, the predictive analysis, and the optimization. And those are really what big data is used for, getting to that optimization, getting to that how do you act on the data and the information. So big data and nonprofits. The nonprofit organization. Now every nonprofit organization has that vision, that mission, that concept, and it's, for the most part, rather narrowly tailored. The issue is all of the constraints. The constraints on time, resources, mandates. There's a whole host of issues that a nonprofit has to deal with. So how can big data help? So I'm going to go through about 4 examples or areas of where big data is really shown to be a huge help in the nonprofit section. Philanthropy being the first, disaster relief, agricultural practices, and disease control. First with philanthropy. Andrew Carnegie, one of our first preeminent philanthropists in the early 1900s, once said, "It is more difficult to give money away intelligently than earn it in the first place." Things have changed a little bit. Now we have the internet, we have crowdsourcing, we have grassroots operations. There are so many ways that people are actually able to intelligently give their money. They're able to find out information about any of the organizations that they're looking at. They're able to find out what organizations are working in their area, in the region that they're interested in. There's just so much information out there that we're really able to harness this. So the two big players are going to be foundations and then the nonprofit service organizations. Foundations can use big data by sharing research. They'll be able to lower the cost of the administration of the grants, which means more funds going to those programs. As far as the service organizations, sharing this data can enable nonprofits working in the same region to coordinate their efforts. They can also focus the timing and content to strategically address their supporters in solicitations or just information gathering. In disaster relief efforts, one of the largest concerns is the finite capacity for the humanitarian aid and the supply chains. How much are we physically able to get to these places? Also, aligning the coordination efforts within and between agencies is a big issue. You have the access information coming in from a variety of sources, so there's going to be a variety of formats. You also need to derive actionable intelligence out of the information in a timely manner. It's not going to help you if you have the information a week later. You need that information right then and be able to act on it right then. Big data gives organizations like UNICEF and the Red Cross a more complete picture of where aid is working, how well it's working, and then they can optimize aid efforts based on that. One of the examples, we have FEMA, although a government agency, it works as a nonprofit. They work closely with a variety of organizations, again with NOAA and the U.S. Geological Survey, and they use the real-time data to assess weather patterns, possible issues with storms, and they can address those possible issues and be prepared for possible disaster relief efforts. We'll come back to the UN Global Pulse Initiative in a few slides, but their biggest idea that I think is really useful for everyone to understand is it's not just analytics. You need analytics, the human aspect of it, the experts, and also the people on the ground. What information are they getting? In agricultural practices, a lot of the NGOs are educating and advising local farmers in areas of malnutrition and starvation on best practices. So field teams will file reports and periodic updates. The difficulties include collecting the various forms of information and translating the information into a common form. That's where a lot of issues arise. And then finally, trying to get some sort of insight from all of this information and make it actionable. Few ways that big data has helped. Technology has definitely unified the data collected. So instead of handwritten reports that someone has to go through, type up, put into a database, now they're able to go out with tablets, such as these, and be able to just go out, immediately input the information into the database, and you're set to go. You allow for input into a streamlined database. Just because you have a cache of all of this data doesn't mean that it's going to be workable. You do need to have a database that is able to handle the information and also set up from the beginning with your original intent in mind so that you can actually get the data that you need out. Organizations can then mine these databases for the data and find out what's working, what's not, and why. And again, just a quick look at food production. Disease control, and this is a big area again. You need to gather the information so that agencies can focus their efforts. I'm not sure, it might be a little small for you to read, but that pink area, there's a potential risk for outbreak all year long. The other areas, it tends to vary, and once you get to the outlying regions, it's only 1 to 2 months. So you're not going to spend your efforts on the outlying areas all year round. You're going to really focus those efforts and those resources on the areas that need it all year round. And again, using the model, organizations are using multiple ways to create that final model. You'll see that the first two are considered the presence points of the disease. You'll find absence points, environmental associates, and then finally they can create a predicted risk map and be able to organize their efforts based on that. And even the National Institute of Health here in America, they're using crowdsourcing influenza surveillance and also the Flu Near You system so that people can report cases. So they allow organizations to refine the metrics and procedures. And the use of weather data compared with the malaria outbreaks has led to a lot of information as far as how weather can be affecting the outbreaks and vice versa. So you're able to see if there's a certain rain percentage that the malaria spikes. You can understand that if you're expecting that much rain to be prepared for the spike in malaria outbreaks. And also, data from a large number of collection points can be centralized. So that entire map of Africa, if you can centralize all of that information, all of the different organizations can then have access to it. And then you can create meaningful aid interventions. So I mentioned the United Nations initiative as far as big data, and it's called the Global Pulse. Then they're really using a lot of social media and getting an idea of how things are happening in real time. A little text heavy, but some of the things they're looking into: research and development, data partnerships with corporations to be able to have access to a larger number of databases, and also these Pulse Lab networks. These networks are set up or will be set up in various areas of the world. Right now, I believe there's New York, one in Indonesia, and there's soon, I think, one opening in Kenya. And again, they're looking at localized issues. So in Indonesia, they're looking at food pricing and seeing what commodities are being used more frequently and what's needed. And there's actually a link here that I'm sure it's going to be posted online so you guys can look at. This is a list of all of the research projects currently going on by Global Pulse, and it's an extensive list, let me tell you. And so there's actually a little video here that I would like to show you on this global initiative. Is it volume?
Is it on the
Okay, I wasn't sure if it had sound. So again, it's just a graphic showing how all of these areas and all of these different data points are going to be able to be centralized, and then people will be able to understand things like the global financial crisis, being able to understand predictors in things that we may see beforehand so that we can head off some of the larger issues. So they're using a variety of technologies, and most notably the mobile devices are the easiest to use. And also having the local labs allows them to address the specific issues of that specific area, in whether it's environmental issues, financial issues, or food scarcity issues. Again, it's just a large database warehouse that is going to be able to collect so much information. And this initiative started just in 2013, so they're sort of just getting off the ground. And a lot of it, again, is through social media, Twitter specifically. They're looking for keywords. So you just saw the graphic as far as I don't feel well, I'm sneezing, I'm coughing. If it's all in a localized area, they can understand if there is some sort of outbreak that is going to happen. Again, it's really the three phases of the United Nations, individual countries, and the individual citizens of those countries participating. And we find our friend is able to get above the poverty line. And that's sort of the ultimate goal, is to really help those less fortunate that aren't able to do it themselves. And so sort of a final quote just to make sure that people understand, not necessarily you, but people in general need to understand data is not information, information is not knowledge, knowledge is not understanding, and understanding is not wisdom. So just because you have the data or the information doesn't mean you have any idea of what it means or what's going on. It's only through a concerted effort of centralizing all of this information and understanding the questions to ask that really get to the heart of the question. So, does anybody have any questions or comments? That was kind of a fly-by-night big data and nonprofits. Yes?
I just want to find out how this data is being collected, and also are the stakeholders, especially victims in courts, aware of such?
Yeah, again, the data source is really important. With the UN initiative, a lot of it is through social media, so it's a little bit towards the hinky side. That's a technical term. You have to be very careful. So if someone is reporting on social media, X is happening, it may or may not be happening. Data sources from previous years and going forward, they do need to be validated. They do need to have some sort of validation procedure, or otherwise it's going to end up being inaccurate and you're going to end up with shoddy data on the other side. And the second part of your question you were asking?
Are the stakeholders?
The stakeholders.
Are the victims aware of the existence of such?
They are in certain areas. They've actually been handing out handhelds to people, especially the big one they talk about is Indonesia, the food scarcity. They will give these instruments to people, give them a quick tutorial on how to use it, and then they'll input the price of the food and the product right there in the market, and then that's uploaded to the centralized lab in Indonesia, and they're able to track how things are going in different areas. So to an extent they're aware of it, and I think more importantly the service organizations are aware of it, and they're going to be able to get in and help, and I think eventually down the line, so it's probably going to be a few years before there's real boots on the ground, but I think that we're really heading towards that way. Yes?
What kind of softwares usually, maps which you show, with PowerPoint, what kind of softwares or programs do you use to put this data and
Right.
show them?
So I showed you a list of a large number of statistical programs. Again, the use of R is by far and away the most used, again, because it's web-based and because it's an open source program. So it's constantly being built, it's constantly becoming more robust, which obviously helps the users. And from that data, then a lot of it is put into simple diagrammatic programs, a lot of the infographics that are what I used. And that's actually an important point, is being able to relate the information in an accessible way to the average person. So if you look at a R graph or SPS graph, people aren't going to know what you're looking at. So if you put it in an infographic, like a bunch of the examples I had, people can understand that. They can understand color, they can understand grouping, and that's really important. So giving a report to superiors or giving a report to a government agency, that's how you want to present it, is in a visual form that most people can recognize. Yes?
Working for a non-profit and expecting that you don't have the resources to validate the data published by what do you call this, a organization that would do data gathering and analysis, how would a nonprofit, a small guy, validate the output of this data gatherers and analysts?
So actually I have an example of it. I'm actually a board member for a local nonprofit called McMahon Ryan Child Advocacy Center that deals with abused children. And this is something we've started to implement as far as our own information. And that's where you can really start and build with a small nonprofit, is work on your own information, build your database so that you can figure out what questions you want answered. So for a lot of our intake information, that's where we get a lot of our data. And so we're able to report back to the government agencies as far as number of children seen, number of children who the perpetrator was a relative, number of children, you know, just exponential on that. So that would be my suggestion, is work with the data that you yourself are collecting, and then always talk to other similar nonprofits, so other nonprofits working in the area. It's the easiest way to get a large data set without the expense. And it's an easy way for everyone to sort of understand what's going on. We work very closely with Vera House, which deals with more of the adult trauma. So that would be my recommendation, is definitely creating some sort of coalition to gather all of that information. But it is a constraint, it is a drawback. Yes?
How to avoid the selection bias during this process, selection?
Yeah, with anything else, you have to be very careful about the sample size that you're using and making sure that it's representative of the population as a whole. In my specific example, you're dealing with a very small subset of the population, so it's a little different as far as first off, children, and then children who have had this abuse. So you need to be careful and take the precautions that you would in any normal circumstance. The social media, that's where it gets really gray, and that's where you have to be really, really careful as far as the validation, if you can. And also, when you represent this data, you need to let people be aware of that. So letting people know this was gathered off of social media, so validity is a little iffy. But the biggest thing is we're just being so inundated by all of this information that it would be very difficult to sort of make everything off track. So it's just a real question of defining the problem and taking the precautions that you normally would. You also had a question?
Yeah. My question is, you talked about the big data.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the difference between the scale need for analysis of big data and the traditional statistic scale?
Right. So the definition is generally around a terabyte. If it's a terabyte or more of information, then it's classified as a big data set. And really, big data, the term big data has been thrown around so much that it's kind of lost its specific definition. Like I said, the general rule of thumb is about a terabyte of information, and our brains actually can't comprehend that number. So it's always interesting that when you get to a point where the brain can't comprehend the actual number, you're getting into big data territory. And it's really any time that you're going to end up with such a large data set that you need some sort of analysis to be able to understand the potential of it. But yeah, it's unfortunately it's still a little murky. And yes?
Is there any financial support by universities for nonprofit organizations?
There are some, and a lot of governments and a lot of organizations are really recognizing the return on investment for something like a big data storage. The UN does have some support to do what they're doing. One of the big things is identifying where it's going to be most helpful. And again, they're using big data to understand where it's going to be most helpful to use big data. So you're sort of starting to layer on. Again, the initiative started in 2013, so they have a lot of growing to do. You know, they're still in an infancy phase, but they do have seed money. They do have research grants and various other types of funding to help with the understanding. Any other questions? All righty.
Thank you very much.
Oh, no problem.